Welcome to SilvaCast, a podcast about all things silviculture. In fact, welcome to Season 1, Episode 1. My name is Greg Edge, along with my co-host, Brad Hutnick. We are both silviculturists with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. And for the record, Brad, we're amateurs.
Very amateur.
And this first episode might sound a little rough, so be kind. Actually, our motto is good enough. Brad, what possessed us to do a podcast about silviculture?
So how did we come to this, Greg? So my best recollection is that we were sitting around probably over an adult beverage one night thinking about this and going, man, wouldn't it be cool if we had a podcast about silviculture where foresters could get information about things that they wanted to hear about.
Well, we like to talk about silviculture,
from people they know.
Why wouldn't somebody else?
That's right. And they should be interested in the topics we're interested in, right?
So,
well, maybe not.
And you listen to a lot of podcasts.
Yeah, and I'm a podcast junkie.
So we thought, hey, this will work.
Yeah, and so this will be a nice way for foresters to get information that they can use, that they can listen to, maybe on the way to the woods, coming back from the woods. Short, concise. It's delivered to them, so they don't have to go looking for it. It's in their inbox. They can listen to it whenever they want to.
Okay.
Hopefully they want to listen to it.
Okay, well, let's give this a try here.
Later in today's episode, we'll also hear from our listeners in a regular segment we call originally the Dropbox.
So the interesting part about that is, since it's our first episode, we have no questions in the Dropbox, right, Brad?
It's an empty box at this point.
Okay, so we're going to encourage people later to submit those.
Yep.
By the way, today's episode of the Silviculture Podcast is brought to you by Q Factor Industries. You know their slogan, next time we'll be there for you, just a little less than before. So we'll get started. As foresters, one thing we think about a lot is regeneration. Making sure we establish the right species and density of tree seedlings follow harvest is a basic element of sustainable forestry. So today on SilvaCast, we're talking about a new system to measure Wisconsin's natural regeneration success or failure, and that is the Forest Regeneration Metric, or what we call FRM. So today on SilvaCast, we have with us Dustin Bronson, a research plant physiologist with the U.S. Forest Service Northern Research Station, and Casey Mennick, Forest Regeneration Program Specialist with Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. So, hey, Casey. Yep. Hey, Dustin.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
So, full disclosure, Dustin, many listeners will recognize you as a former DNR employee, now turncoat. Is that not true?
Yeah, so for 7 years, from 2012 until 2019, I was the DNR forest ecology scientist. Started in science services, and then Forestry brought me over into their division, and I loved every minute of it. I thought I was going to be there my entire career, and as I was living up in Rhinelander, a unique opportunity came along with the Forest Service. And I tell you, one of the things that that's my life mission is that during those 7 years as a scientist in Rhinelander with the DNR, I wanted to collaborate more than we did with the Forest Service. And I didn't know how to do that. You don't know the inroads. And so now that I feel like I have a good handle on the DNR and I'm at the Forest Service, my goal is to come up with kind of a more collaborative research group and work with the DNR a lot. And so I really see there's a lot of kind of potential opportunities with me going to the Forest Service to kind of co-develop research with the DNR hand in hand. So that's my goal. We'll see if we can
So what you're saying is we can't get rid of you.
You'll never get rid of me.
Okay. Yeah. Just so we got that straight.
Yeah,
we're good.
I'm here forever.
Our other guest today on the show is Casey Mennick. Casey, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi. So I've been with the DNR for about 2 years now. I was brought on as a Forest Regeneration Program Specialist to kind of monitor and coordinate the monitoring of the FRM measurements across the state, both for program management and for data analysis.
And that's maybe the first question. Some of us may not know what FRM is. What is FRM?
So FRM is the Forest Regeneration Metric. We are using it for our larger statewide monitoring. It's a 300th acre plot where we're tallying all seedling and sapling size trees by height class. And we're finding that height class is really important to look at how regeneration trajectories can be seen across forests and really take a better assessment of what your management is looking like.
So it's a regeneration survey method.
Yes, correct.
And foresters are familiar with lots of different survey methods for regeneration. And I know from working with Wisconsin DNR, we've never really been consistent about what kind of method or survey we use. So why is this particular method better? Why are we going to this particular system?
Yeah, I think having a standardized metric is really the most important thing here. Like you said, people are doing a lot of things in different ways, but it makes it really difficult to try to do any kind of comparisons evenly across the counties, across the statewide, across forest groups. So really having one metric to kind of rule them all is really important to take a look at these better statewide analyses.
When I was as a DNR forest scientist, folks were coming to me from leadership and kind of high up and asking a lot of questions about state forestry as a whole. And of course, this was pre-tablet days, and so it was really hard because foresters do a variety of different monitoring. They might just do the quick windshield check. They're going out to stands that they set up a number of years ago, and they just want to make sure that they're on the right trajectory. They might actually collect data, and they write it down, and it's sitting in a drawer somewhere, or at best, it's sitting on their computer in an Excel file. And so it was really hard up until the FRM for us to be able to say something across multiple different kind of ranger stations, multiple different counties. And so we needed a system that really collected data all in the same way, under the same protocol, and it would be centrally located so that when leadership or whoever has a question, that we could go to this kind of central repository for data and look and hopefully try to come up with some answers to those questions.
So not only were you trying to provide a tool for foresters looking at their stands, but you were trying to bring that data all together on a much larger scale so you can start to answer other questions.
Exactly, yeah.
One plot to rule them all.
One
right?
picture involved.
Yeah. So are other states doing something similar to this?
Well, I don't know about other states. I know that just maybe to talk about the history of this thing. Back a number of years ago, there was a silviculture guidance team or a post hoc team formed from silviculture guidance team looking at forest regeneration. And they wanted to look at the goals of this ad hoc team that I was a part of, wanted to look at standards for regeneration. So what are minimum standards? And then how should we go about measuring those? And so it was during that process that part of my job at that time was to kind of look at what other people are doing to assess regeneration. And we know that, I'm sure we're going to say the word deer 100 times during this podcast, but we know deer are a major problem in forest regeneration, or at least they can be. And so we wanted a metric that kind of could help us assess what the deer impacts are, but also just give us something beyond deer, because so many deer metrics are just deer focused and they're not providing you any other helpful benefit beyond a deer browse indice, let's say. So we looked at a variety of different metrics, what other states were doing, and what we came on to that we were really excited about was at a recent Forest Service scientist had published a general technical report, GTR 148. I'll see if we can include it in the show notes. But it's Will McWilliams was the author of that. And so we want to always give him credit. And he came up with this forest regeneration metric. And it looked at the interesting part of the metric is that it incorporated heights. So foresters are probably trained, in school to count seedlings and saplings. But as soon as something, a seedling progresses into the sapling class, it's no longer typically browsable. Its terminal leader is typically beyond 6 feet. Deer are not having a major impact on saplings. So we're bundling the seedling class all together, and we needed some more kind of finer understanding of different sizes of seedlings. And so height class gives us that. And so the beauty of the FRM is that we have different height classes across the seedling and sapling range. And if you can, kind of like the reverse J for seedling sapling class, if you can do that kind of reverse J throughout the entire height class range, now we can have more kind of predictive abilities about how many 1-foot seedlings and 3-foot seedlings do you need to create, let's say, a 5-foot or a 10-foot seedling. And so that was really important. And the other kind of interesting thing about the metric that we really liked from a state perspective is that this Forest Service scientist created it to be incorporated into FIA. And so this is part of the FIA P2 Plus protocol, this exact FRM measurement. We've made some slight tweaks to it for Wisconsin, but we only did that to make it kind of faster and more efficient, but it still talks with the FIA measurement. So as we're collecting FRM data here in Wisconsin, we now can employ FIA data and look at the same metric for Wisconsin, but outside of Wisconsin as well. And so now we can see what Michigan is, what their equivalent FRM data is doing, what Minnesota's equivalent FRM data, and that's huge when you can look across an entire region. So very powerful.
So one of the unique aspects of this particular survey method is the height classes that are incorporated into that. And we're collecting that information statewide. So how is that information being used? Like, what are we doing with the data that we collect across the state? Or what kind of questions are we trying to answer?
Sure. So right now we're just really looking to see at which areas of the state, what the regeneration is looking like across habitat types, across forest types, to really see, are we meeting those regeneration standards that we have in place on average? Going forward, that'll be really helpful to see, do our regeneration recommendations make sense based on these? And I think taking that height class into perspective, are we seeing that things are able to reach that kind of benchmark that we have set in a trajectory and a timeline that we want to see it looking like?
So part of that data then that foresters are collecting also has some information about the actual silviculture that's going on those sites. So that data then can be broken up into the different silvicultural methods that are being used.
Yeah, so we'll be able to look at how different harvest types and how that kind of trajectory over time looks years after those harvest types. So does it take X amount of years after a single tree selection versus doing some kind of patch selection harvest, and really break down those differences between management to see how more specifically the regeneration is responding.
Casey, listeners might not be familiar with what an FRM plot is. What is an FRM plot?
So an FRM plot is a 300th acre plot, so a 6.8 foot radius. In a plot, all seedling and sapling sized trees are going to be tallied by height class. We're also going to be looking at deer browse impacts, which is on a intensity scale from 1 to 6, which is based on a percentage of stems with evidence of deer browse. We're also looking at a couple other plot level variables, herbaceous and woody competition, as well as overstory cover, and then reporting details on forest type, previous management, and next plan management.
To think that, like, if you're a forester, let's say, if you're a forester right now and you're looking at a stand that you're getting ready to enter, to manage, set up a prescription for, if you were to have data from the last harvest or immediately after the last harvest to say, what was the diversity after the last harvest? How many stems per acre did we have? What was the different height classes of that regeneration? And now you get to see what it looks like as a mature stand, and you went between those 2 points in time. Incredibly powerful. And so the next kind of class of foresters, and hopefully this measurement, this tool becomes more useful as the years go on, and hopefully even in the 5-10 year span. But to be a forester 40 years from now and to be looking at mature stands that you're going to harvest and have these data to say this is what the stand started as, and to be able to harvest it and say, do we have more regeneration than it did prior? Are we significantly less in regeneration? It's going to be hugely powerful. It's going to be a game changer down the road. This tool only becomes more and more powerful as we continue collecting more data.
I can hear some foresters saying, though, I don't have time to take regeneration plots.
Yeah.
So what would you say to that? How much time does that take them?
Well, it depends on how much regeneration you have, but FRM plots can be completed in only a couple minutes if you have kind of an average stand. And you can add FRM into your regular cruise that you're doing, so you can add it as every cruise point if you want really good data, or every couple cruise points. It's all going to depend on what kind of level of data significance you want to see. If you just want a general survey, you can do that, or you can take a more intensive kind of sampling method to get that really detailed data that you're looking for.
And to kind of build on it, we have the DNR, the Wisconsin DNR is lucky to have a dedicated FRM team, people that this is their job every day. But we have DNR foresters that are doing this as well. But we also have some county foresters. Shout out to Bayfield County and Taylor County. They've really kind of taken the lead, and we hope to see more counties get involved with this. Bayfield does enough plots; they're able to tell information on a stand basis. So oftentimes, right now the way this tool was set up was to take a few plots per stand, but to be able to say something more about a cover type across, let's say, a county or a region. But if you get enough plots in a stand, you can start to say, is the west side fully stocked? Is the east side fully stocked? You can say something about that stand specifically. And so we're seeing different groups of people. We have these plots being taken on federal lands and private lands. And so we're really going to have a good understanding across ownership. But the more buy-in, especially from professional foresters across the state and maybe even across the region. I know we've talked to Michigan and Minnesota, and they seem very intrigued by incorporating this. But obviously, these are large kind of changes at the leadership level, when you're talking about taking time. So we'd like to see this measurement grow. And again, we didn't start it. We could just kind of built upon what the Forest Service had already created. But it's going to be pretty powerful.
So what I'm hearing you saying is it a little bit depends on what are the questions that the forester wants answered in terms of how much time and effort and how many plots they put in.
Yeah.
So if they want, really specific detailed information at the stand level, that's going to be more plots. If you're trying to answer these broad questions you're talking about at the state level, that's going to be fewer plots, more dispersed over a big area.
So again, I said we made some slight changes from the Forest Service measurement. And the reason the Forest Service measurement, I'll give some examples here. If you look through the GTR, they don't talk about doing an understory competition measurement nor an overstory shading measurement. But they have, because those data are being collected in the context of FIA, they have those data to kind of talk with it. But since we don't have our FRM plots right next to an FIA plot, we needed to collect some other data to make sense of that. Like, are you in the matrix of this, or are you inside a gap? And that's why we added some of these measurements. But as we were going through and doing this process, we were getting input from foresters and saying, well, you should have a invasive species measurement, or you should have a measurement that looks at, ironwood specifically. And so we fed this through the ad hoc process, but we were very careful to say we need a measurement that's quick, that's efficient, and that gets at really what our main point is, and that's forest regeneration. So if a forester out there is really concerned about an invasive species of some sort, and they want to do a count while they're doing forest regeneration, that's great. But we really need a standardized measurement. And so there's part of us that says, let's keep FRM the way it is and the way it's created right now. And it's not going to maybe answer everyone's needs. You might have these additional needs. That's not to say you can't collect information on top of that. But at the core, here's what FRM is, a core measurement. And I think it probably suffices for at least 95% of the forester needs, at least in the state of Wisconsin.
Yeah. So it's pretty cool that you can use FRM at the stand level, but you can extrapolate out to regional scales and get really good information out of it. And that's pretty cool. And we don't have many tools that do that.
Probably like my number one question that I receive from leadership, from foresters, while as a DNR scientist was, how many plots do I need to say something like that? That's the ultimate question. And for people out there listening, the answer is dependent upon variability. So if you're in a mature red pine stand and you're doing this forest regeneration measurement, I don't know why, but maybe you are, you can imagine I bring that up because there's probably not a lot of variability in a mature red pine stand. And And so you probably don't need a lot of plots because from one plot to this other plot, there's not a lot of variability. You go to, I don't know, some kind of recent patch cut northern hardwoods in which you're inside of gaps and outside of gaps, and there's just a lot of variability. You need more plots. I have a tool. I have an Excel sheet that I use a lot that really, and we can provide it here for your audience as well. But it really helps me think about. There's kind of a couple inputs, and that's asking you what is your average number. Let's say the thing you're interested about is average stems per acre. And so if you know your average stems per acre, and you can calculate a standard deviation. So it might take collecting a couple plots of pilot data, let's say. But if you know average and you know standard deviation, and then it's just, well, how confident do you want to be in your future sampling? And you can set your confidence interval in your allowable error, but then it'll output, okay, based on your average and standard deviation, you need X number of plots. And so like for the counties that are doing this on their own, they want a lot of high confidence information about a single stand. They can collect a little bit, feed it into this calculator, and tells them how many plots they need. If you're just trying to say something about a cover type, obviously you're just trying to get that number across the entire region for that cover type. So
yeah, so a lot of the cruising softwares have that calculation built into them.
Exactly.
I don't know, in Wisconsin we use Forest Metrics. Casey, does that have a kind of a standard error?
It does for
calculation built
typical
in?
cruises, not for FRM.
Not for the FRM.
But I think
Okay.
other things might have similar
Yeah.
options.
And you're looking at variability based on the number of seedlings or saplings, right? Not the overstory.
correct.
Yeah.
So when you're doing like a plot, how many plots do I need? It's user defined about, well, what is the thing, like you're creating an average and standard deviation. What is that average? What is that standard deviation? So it could be number of desirable stems. It could be total number of stems. It's however you want to calculate it. For FRM, we've gone through the math and calculated that already based on some initial data. So that's how the FRM team comes up with their number of plots they need per county, per cover type.
Mm-hmm.
Greg, I think in the future we're going to have a drinking game on the show where when a guest says standard deviation, we both have to have a cup of coffee.
Well, people might do that. People might be doing that
Might be
themselves
doing it-
right
might be
now
doing it
after
right
they
now.
listen to this. So
Yeah, it'll be good.
We'll see.
So, Casey, I was going to ask you, so we've started collecting this at a statewide scale. So where are we at with that right now?
So it was initially determined based on kind of that statistical level that we wanted things to be at, that we'll need 16,000 FRM plots collected across the entire state. Right now we're in our second year of sampling out of our 3-year sampling window. Right now we have about 10,000 of that 16,000. So I guess at the end of this year 3, we're hoping to have that statistically significant county level regeneration data that we're looking for.
So who's collecting that data right now?
Yeah, we have a team of 12 seasonal FRM technicians located throughout the state. We're also getting data from county foresters, state foresters, private forestry, as well as some of the GNA efforts on federal lands.
Yeah. In the future, do you envision, and maybe this is an open question for both of you, do you envision that audience or that group of people bringing that data to us being larger? So not just the technicians, but maybe a whole foresters, others?
Yeah, I think as we get the word out more and have people utilize FRM more and have that kind of built into recommended cruise schedules and things like that, being able to have that huge data source to feed into this program will be huge. And I think once we start to get out some of these early results and show what FRM is capable of, we'll get more and more data sourcing as we go on.
Are you looking for, in those 16,000 plots, certain cover types?
Yes, we are focusing on northern hardwoods, oak, hickory, and pine forests. Those are 3 of the more major cover types in Wisconsin that we've kind of found have the greatest regeneration concerns. So we're measuring those in all counties of the state that are more than 30% forested. So it's about the majority, 2/3 of the state. And then in 3 counties each, we're taking a look at bottomland hardwoods, fir, spruce, and aspen birch.
And since we're looking at regeneration, I assume that these are stands that have been recently harvested.
Correct. So we're targeting our sample in stands that have recently had a regeneration harvest, so not including things like thinnings. We're going to areas where foresters are managing for regeneration and where we are going to be expecting to see regeneration.
And what's recently mean?
Typically within the past 5 years, we're focusing our sample on.
Okay. And then is the intent to go back and remeasure some of those?
Yes, so at the end of our 3-year sampling cycle, we'll begin another window and resample our previous sites in addition to adding new locations as well.
If you had a crystal ball and you could look ahead into the future, we've been doing this for 20 years, what do you think is going to be the biggest benefit we get out of FRM?
Big question.
Well, I think so. Two things. Let's see if I can hold on to both of them in my mind here. The biggest thing is we're going to be able to. So the way this is set up is that we're always thinking about modeling and forecasting, right? And so if you think of if your listeners know what Forest Vegetation Simulator is, or there's a bunch of model products out there that you can use. One of the things any of those model products doesn't do is tell you establishment. So if we're getting establishment data and we can say, here's how many stems are on the ground right now, and here's by the species, you're off to a good start, because what we can do is kind of grow things in a model world, right? But one of those kind of faults of some of the growing, it's just a volume growth model, is that deer isn't well captured in that, and we know it's a major problem. And so to understand kind of what the drop off is, kind of populate that reverse J, so to speak, so you can say, from 1 foot to 3 foot to 5 foot to 10 foot, here's the kind of exponential decay that we're seeing for this cover type for this region. Once you get above kind of now you're free to grow status, now the models do incredibly well. So our forecasting is going to be hugely, improved upon by this tool. And so, and the second part that goes into that is kind of feeding into the modeling is the economics of this whole thing. We want to know kind of what our stands are going to look like in terms of species, but as well as economics. We have a lot of industry that is dependent on this. And so to be able to say, this is where we're going, and if we want to change that trajectory, we still have the opportunity now, right? These stands are 5-10 years old. So if we need to do site prep early, we can do that now. We're not going to be able to do that 20 years down the road. And so it's just a lot easier to kind of jump on these problems, if there are problems, early than later.
So it sounds like maybe it's a track record, right? It'll let us know what works, what doesn't work, so we can avoid the things that don't work, and then hopefully be a little more efficient in time and money and things like that.
And as I mentioned earlier in the podcast here is, to be a forester and to be handed data with your mature stand that you're about to go enter and set up a prescription for, and say, here's what the regeneration looked like 40 years ago when the stand was initiated. That's huge. You get to see now what you're dealt with, and after you harvest that, how does my seedling density and species richness compared to what it was when the last forester, harvested this thing? Like, I think it's really going to help us understand, especially when you throw climate into this whole thing, and how does warmer, drier conditions. It's not the title of this podcast shouldn't be that it's all deer. That there is just a lot of things going on out there, and it's complex. And so right now, at the very least, we're just trying to understand what's working, what's not. Are things changing, in the course of that stand rotation period?
What always kind of amazes me, that regeneration is such a basic element of forestry, but we've never really systematically monitored for regeneration. Mm-hmm. Individual foresters have done great jobs. In their area, they do regeneration checks. They've got a good handle on things, but nobody shares the information. Nobody looks across lines. And there's large areas where we never monitored it. We just assumed that it would work. And so
when you put this into it,
have a consistent system, I think, is just an amazing step forward.
Oftentimes I think we often we hammer on ourselves and say, why didn't we do this 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago? But you figure okay, we had the cutover, right? 1920s, 1930s, up until that point. And so by the time we had our real first mature stands that we're entering, it was darn near the 70s, right? And for a lot of stands. And so at that point, it was all about timber improvement. How do we go into these stock stands and improve the timber value? And so a lot of the research during that period, 70s and 80s, was, what thinning method to what basal area threshold should we be thinning to? And it was all about improving that stand that we handed after the cutover. And now we're getting to a point in our forestry history that we're now starting to rotate stands through enough that we're thinking, wow, we need to be thinking more of just improvement. We got to be thinking about Anyhow, it puts into context of maybe why that hasn't been the focus up till now.
Mm-hmm.
So, Casey, people are going to be really interested in this. Where can they go to get more information about FRM?
Yeah, the DNR's website, dnr.wisconsin.gov. If you do keyword search FRM, we have a lot of protocol resources. We have training videos and some early data as we start to get that out. So I'd really recommend people take a look at that site for more information or get in contact if they have any questions about starting FRM monitoring on their own stands yeah.
Okay, and hopefully we can try and put maybe some of that information in the show notes as well, so people can take a
put
look
some
at
links
that.
down below.
We got show notes.
We got show notes.
That's cool.
We're
Casey?
professional, Greg. We can do this. We have show notes.
No, we're not professionals. Casey, Dustin, thank you for coming to our inaugural podcast.
Thanks for having
Yeah,
us.
thank you.
Thank you, guys. This was fun.
Good discussion.
Yeah.
That was Dustin Bronson, a research plant physiologist with the U.S. Forest Service, Northern Research Station, and Casey Mennick, Forest Regeneration Program Specialist with Wisconsin DNR, Division of Forestry.
Well, that wraps up our first episode of Silvacast. We hope you enjoyed the experience, good, bad, or otherwise. Have any ideas for future topics? Have any burning questions you'd like us to take a stab at? Drop us a line at fedi@uwsp.edu. We'll try to answer your question on our next podcast.
Podcasts don't happen on their own, so thanks to Haley Frater and Dan Martinson from UW-Stevens Point's Forestry Education and Development Initiative.
The entire archive of Silvacast can be found on...
Hey, wait, Brad. This is the first episode.
Oh, yeah.
By the way, today's episode of Silvacast is brought to you by Q Factor Industries, whose slogan is, "Next time, we'll be there for you, just a little less than before."